The mind that thinks are thoughts is a pretty special place. But is it distinct from the brain? Is there in fact a soul directing our thoughts, or are they determined entirely by the output of our biology? Could that mouse scampering through your garden be thinking deep thoughts, or are humans really special? Before there was cognitive science, before there was neurobiology, before there was even biology, human, humanists have wrestled with these questions. Traditionally, philosophy of mind scholars in the West have fallen on one side or the other of the mind or body question. Dualists, okay, this one is a bit hard. Don't know if I pronounced it correctly, so I need to check it.
Dualists.
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 Dualists, alright, dualists would say that the mind would function just as it does, whether or not it has a body. Dualists say that there is something special about the mind. It is not just an incredibly interesting and complicated machine. Trees and tables and billiard balls can be explained by physics and biology, but you need to add something extra, some non-physical property to explain human consciousness. On the other side are the physiologists. I don't know. I'm not sure. Let me check it then.
Physicalists.
Physicalists. Most philosophers today still find the physicalist explanation more compelling, that mental phenomena have a physiological or a neurophysiological basis. Even that simple statement, though, raises more questions. For example, if the physicalism, well, how to pronounce this word? Let me check.
Physicalism.
Physicalism. If physicalism is characterized as everything physical, what does physical mean? It can't mean tangible, since gravity is a physical force, but it can't be touched. Rather, says philosophy professor Karen Pennett, it means that everything is accounted for or generated by the kinds of things physicists talk about. Physicists might not discuss chairs very often, but chairs are fully composed of the kinds of things physics talks about, like atoms and molecules. Okay. The behavior of the chair is accounted for by the behavior of the tiny bits. The existence of the chair depends on the existence of the smaller parts, the more fundamental level of reality. She explains her current book project, Making Things Up, looks at the relations whereby more fundamental things determine or generate less fundamental things, and at what this fundamentality talk ultimately comes to. Even among oh wow, again, this word, it's like a pain in the neck.
Physicalists.
Among physicalists, there are two main schools of thought, says Assistant Professor of Philosophy William Starr. Functionalists say that the mind is what the brain does, which is a procedural view. You can have the same thought processes happen in very different physical media, An alien with an entirely different biology would still have the capacity for thought. Identity theorists, on the other hand, emphasize that the mind is the brain and that's all there is to it, says Starr. But how do you get belief and thought out of a lump of brain? This is a this is a particularly hard version of the question of how ordinary middle-sized objects arise from the interaction of atoms and molecules, explains Bennett. People can see that if you were smart enough and had all the relevant information about atoms and electrons, you could understand how they become a car. But people find it particularly perplexing to see how the physical goings on really could explain and generate conscious experience. I myself I myself am inclined toward the view that it is not any more mysterious in the consciousness case than in any other, adds Bennett. But Laurent de Breuil, professor of Romance Studies and Comparative Literature, says that whatever your position about dualism or physicalism, a mind is more than a brain. Not only are mental operations extended beyond the nervous system and outsourced to books, objects, or computers, but they also occur. But there are but all right, occur out there, especially when we share language, and where neuroscientists look for commonalities in the brain, thus characterizing cognition as a repeatable, executed task. Jubriel, oh, what this name is like a pain in the neck. Jubriel says there are situations where we assign things fluctuating meanings they don't normally have and create new ideas. To understand this requires more than a strictly cognitive framework, he says. Okay, 7 minutes. Consciousness conundrums. Consciousness conundrums. Philosophers address the question we care about, for which there is no specialized, typically empirical. What a word. Oh wow, not with that. Only this one. Let me see.
Empirical.
Empirical, not empirical, empirical. And I want to see this word. Let me check it.
Conundrums.
Conundrums. Okay, empirical methodology, says Derek Barenboim, Suzanne Lin Saig Professor in Philosophy and Ethics, and Stanford H. Taylor 50 Chair of the Sage School. In psychology, two of those questions philosophy addresses are: what's the right model for cognition, and how do we account for consciousness for consciousness. Philosophy has an important role to play there, developing models to explain these questions, says Barenboim. I don't know how to pronounce his name. The topic of consciousness has attracted considerable attention in recent years. It is a familiar phenomenon, the most intimate thing we experience, that everything looks a certain way and feels a certain way to us. Yet, ever since Sigmund Freud, it's become common to believe that there is a great deal of sub or unconscious process going on beneath our awareness. As Barenboim notes, you might not be conscious of your anger toward your father, but it is still having an effect. Sigmund Freud. But non-Western philosophers have approached the question of consciousness in very different ways, notes Yusuf Washington, 16. As he learned in the course he took with Lawrence Mercuria, professor of Asian Studies, some figures in Indian philosophy have argued that the sense of self that we call consciousness is viewed more as a witness than an agent. We are more witnesses to conscious experience than actually agents who are causing things to happen. Boom's last book, Free Will, Agency and Meaning in Life, explored this corollary question to the issue of consciousness, that of free will. If our minds are just physical things, then our minds are governed by what our minds are made up of, which is determined by the rules of physics. So is there room for free choice? Baboom asks. As he explains, if preceding events render succeeding events inevitable, then going back in time, the way the universe was before you were born, fixes all your choices and actions. All of our actions would be casually determined. Would it would it then be right to blame and punish people for their bad choices, or would believing people are free and holding them morally responsible involve a mistake? If determinism is proved true tomorrow, then you'd know that the brain really does work like a computer. That is all just a system of inputs with specific fixed outputs, and subsequently, you'd have to accept that we have no free will at all, explains Emma Lugville, 17, a student in Perboom's Topics in Philosophy of Mind Free Will course this semester. I think, therefore, Jibriel's new book, The Intellective Space, focuses on the distinction between thinking and thought. There is a process in our minds, he says, that bypasses cognitive structure, which he calls intellection. His extensive research in experimental psychology, literature, and philosophy led him to conclude that we say more than we think more than we say. But is thinking an entirely neural process? One line of research in philosophy of mind, embodied cognition, examines how our problem solving capitalizes on the fact that we have bodies and certain features of our environment available to us to work out our thoughts and to work through certain kinds of calculations, to try to understand the mind and what it does as this isolated computer stuck in our skull. The skull can be a distorting idea, points out Starr, offering the example of people who use their fingers to count. It is really important to understand how the mind uses the body and the physical environment to think. Imagine Mary and her language. Philosophers often use thought experiments to explore ideas. One of the most famous ones involves a character named Mary. Mary is a brilliant scientist of the future who lives in a room that only displays shades of black, white, and grey. Mary has learned everything there is to know about the physical functioning of the world. She knows everything about how sensation works from the neurophysiological perspective. But can she know everything there is to know about the human mind by virtue of knowing everything physical there is to know? One day Mary is suddenly freed from the room and is confronted with a red tomato and she learns something that she didn't know before, which is what it is like to have red sensation. Some would say that this famous thought experiment teaches us that there are truths about experiences that can't be learned by knowing all the physical truths. But is color a physical perception, or is it language based, as some have shown? We know from research that language doesn't completely work, says Dolby. When you translate poetry into multiple languages, it is not the same. For a long time in science, people were interested in how language can stabilize meaning, but in the humanities, people are also interested in how languages destabilize meaning, he points out. Let me check how to pronounce this one correctly.
Humanities.
All right. This one. Humanities. This one.
Stabilize.
Stabilize. I pronounced it correctly. Why I was. Okay. Only in the last 30 or so years has language even become a topic of cognitive science. Before then, says Jubriel, language could be reduced to syntactic. What is this word? I don't think I pronounce it correctly, but I'm gonna give it a go.
Syntactic.
All right. Syntactic structures, and was considered only superficially different from what you were thinking. So there was no room to study language as an abstract movement in the mind. But most humanists, okay, this one, humanity, not that one, this one, humanists. But most humanists would say what you are saying is not the same as what you are thinking. Starr's research looks at how we manage to use language to get things done. I see it as one of the most exciting ways of understanding how the mind works, which can't be accomplished without taking seriously how language, the mind, and the world interact, says Starr. For example, I don't want to know just how this one class of linguistic constructions work. I want to know how they are used in a population and what that tells us about the mind and meaning. Starr uses language use and communication as a window into humans' special psychological and social capacities. One aspect he's focused on is the human ability to reason about what doesn't exist, both what might have been and the consequences of what might have been. If you try and spell out in a scientific way what it is we're doing, there are a lot of mysterious that pop up, Starr says. To build up a whole separate world and imagine the relations between different possible events in those worlds is computationally. What a word. Let me check it. Computationally intensive. A lot of my work is looking at models developed in psychology and artificial intelligence and engaging them with philosophical and humanist questions. Language is unquestionably a hallmark of the human species. The flexibility and unbounded expressivity of our linguistic abilities is unique in the biological world, as Morten Christiansen, professor of psychology and co-director of the cognitive science program, notes in his forthcoming book, Creating Language, Integrating Evolution, Acquisition and Processing, co-authored by Nick Chatter in the Cognitive Neuroscience Lab at Cornell. Christiansen aims to produce a comprehensive account of the evolution, acquisition, and processing of language, while his approach is scientific, using methods such as a neuroimaging, neuroimaging, eye tracking, statistical learning experiments, psycholinguistic studies, and computational modeling. He notes that the humanities offer key insights into the mind as well. Language, he writes, is a product of cultural evolution and can therefore only be fully understood through collaborations across the humanities and the social and natural sciences. Okay, how many minutes? 21. Wowzers, this article going crazy. I think I might stop here. The mind through literature. Okay, the mind through literature.